Imagine a political fortress. Like massive stone walls, right?
Right, totally impenetrable.
Exactly. Or, well, that's what you're supposed to think. But what if those walls aren't actually keeping the enemy out? What if they're just trapping the guards inside because the external food supply suddenly got cut off?
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, so today we are doing a deep dive into the morning of April 13th, 2026, the day Europe's most famous political fortress completely collapsed.
And I mean collapsed. It's the kind of geopolitical shockwave that just forces everyone to rewrite their assumptions.
Yeah.
After 16 years in power, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán wasn't just edged out by the opposition leader Peter Magyar and the Pizza Party. He was overwhelmingly defeated.
Completely overwhelmingly.
Yeah, we're talking about Magyar securing 53.6% of the vote and a constitutional supermajority. That's 138 out of 199 seats.
Which is just wild to think about. So, to understand how a deeply entrenched government fell, despite having almost every institutional advantage, we're pulling from two really incredible sources for this deep dive. First, we've got this comprehensive analytical paper by Farid Novin in the Global Review. And we're pairing that with some amazing on-the-ground, real-time election night reporting from DW Deutsche.
Really good stuff in there.
Yeah. And the mission today for you listening is we want to break down the actual mechanics of this upset, the frankly wild foreign interference that tried to stop it, and what this whole masterclass in modern elections means for how global democracy actually functions.
Because this definitely wasn't a standard election. I mean, it was a live stress test.
Right.
It was testing whether an illiberal state, a state that had systematically reconfigured its own electoral rules over a decade and a half.
Built the fortress, essentially.
Exactly. Built the fortress. Could that state be dismantled using those very same ballot boxes?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we even touch the geopolitical spy games, we have to look at the Hungarian voter's wallet.
Always follow the money.
Always. Because according to Farid Novin's analysis, the entire economic model of the incumbent government wasn't actually self-sustaining. It was essentially built on a massive, continuous influx of European Union funds.
Yeah, and that is the structural foundation of the fortress we were just talking about.
All right.
Ever since Hungary joined the EU in 2004, they have been a net beneficiary state.
Yeah.
So we're looking at EU structural and cohesion funds.
And just to clarify, cohesion funds are basically massive grants, right?
Exactly. Massive grants the EU gives to its poorer member states so they can catch up economically to the rest of the bloc. And for years, these funds made up roughly 3.5% of Hungary's entire GDP annually.
Wow, 3.5% is huge. But the analysis points out this money wasn't just, building bridges and schools.
Oh, far from it. From 2010 onward, those funds were basically channeled through vast patronage networks.
So how does that actually work on the ground?
The mechanism is actually quite simple. The EU provides the development money, right? But the local government decides who wins the public procurement contracts to do the actual work.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. So if you continuously award those contracts to political allies, well, those allies hire local workers. And suddenly, entire regional economies are directly dependent on voting for the incumbent party just to keep their paychecks clearing.
That is so wild. It's like running a massive, luxurious corporation entirely on a credit card provided by a bank that you constantly publicly insult.
That's a perfect analogy.
Because the government was building this whole domestic narrative that the EU was an existential threat to Hungarian sovereignty while literally using EU cash to fuel their own political machine.
Yeah, but then in late 2022, the bank finally froze the account.
They cut up the card.
They absolutely did. The European Commission halted an unprecedented 22.5 billion euros.
Billion. With a B.
With a B, and they did it due to systemic rule of law violations. The commission cited the erosion of judicial independence, the politicization of the media, and, well, that exact issue we just talked about.
The public procurement stuff.
Exactly. Using public procurement to enrich political elites.
We really need to underline the scale of that freeze for a second. Because 22.5 billion euros is nearly 8% of Hungary's GDP.
Yeah, it's staggering.
When you vaporize 8% of a country's economic engine overnight, What does that actually look like on the ground for the average citizen?
Honestly, it looks like immediate severe economic stagnation. The whole illusion of rising living standards just shattered.
Wow.
Yeah, Hungary entered this 3-year period where GDP growth was sitting at a dismal 0.5% in both 2024 and 2025. And real wages outside the capital just started falling.
Which gave Peter Magyar his entire campaign strategy, didn't it?
It gave him everything he needed, yeah.
Because while Orbán's government tried to run this campaign focused on civilizational conflict.
Right, leaning heavily into rhetoric about migration and cultural identity.
Exactly. Magyar just completely ignored it. He focused relentlessly on kitchen table issues. He pointed to the housing affordability crisis. He pointed to the crumbling healthcare and education systems.
He weaponized the economic reality. Novin's analysis actually calls the previous government's approach selective compliance.
Selective compliance, meaning they only follow the rules when they absolutely had to.
Pretty much. For years, they would do just enough, cosmetic institutional reform to delay EU sanctions, keeping the patronage money flowing. But when the European Commission finally called their bluff and locked the FAS away, the reality of the domestic economy just became impossible to hide from the voters.
There's a specific detail from Novin's paper that I think perfectly captures this whole era.
Oh, the roundabout.
Yes, the roundabout. In this town called Zalaegerszeg, there is a 1.5 million euro roundabout.
Fully funded by the EU.
Fully funded. And it literally leads nowhere.
Nowhere at all.
It was built in anticipation of a railway project that just never materialized.
Mm-hmm.
So Magyar's campaign effectively pointed at these glowing monuments to misallocated funds like that roundabout, while voters couldn't even afford their grocery bills.
It's incredibly effective retail politics. So with the domestic economy crumbling and the EU cohesion funds locked away in Brussels, the incumbent government desperately needed leverage and resources.
Right.
And that financial pressure directly motivated their most controversial geopolitical alliance.
Russia.
Russia.
I mean, if your primary lender cuts you off, you look for a new financier.
Right.
But this pivot created a level of strategic dependency that just set off alarm bells across all of Europe. Because by 2025, Hungary was relying on Russia for a staggering 90% of its oil imports.
90%. It made them by far the most exposed EU member state to Kremlin energy leverage. But the relationship went far beyond just energy.
Right, because the sources mentioned the intelligence aspect of this.
Exactly. Within Western intelligence circles, Hungary was widely characterized as a fifth column inside the EU.
And for anyone unfamiliar, a fifth column essentially refers to a group within a country or an alliance that is secretly sympathetic to or actively working for its enemies.
Yeah, because Orbán consistently resisted EU efforts to diversify energy supplies after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. And he secured specific exemptions from sanctions. So European partners just stopped trusting Budapest with sensitive information.
And that distrust was entirely validated just days before this 2026 election.
Oh, the audio leaks.
The audio leaks. A consortium of investigative journalists dropped an absolute bombshell. Leaked audio recordings of phone calls between Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
And the contents of those leaks explain exactly why the rest of the EU was so terrified.
Yeah, what was actually on those tapes?
The audio suggested real-time information sharing during highly classified internal EU deliberations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, in one call from late 2023, Szijjártó reportedly contacted Lavrov directly from a European Council session.
Wait, literally from inside the room?
Literally while the session was happening. He was giving the Russian foreign minister live updates on Ukraine and Moldova's EU accession talks. And on the audio, the top diplomat of a NATO and EU member state explicitly tells Lavrov, "I am always at your service."
Oh, my God. I mean, you hear something like that in a diplomatic context, and it instantly reframes the entire election.
Totally.
Magyar used those leaks to pose a very simple question to the electorate. He essentially asked, is this pragmatic energy cooperation, or has Hungary just completely surrendered its national sovereignty to Moscow?
And Russia clearly recognized the threat Magyar posed because they did not just sit on the sidelines here.
No, they didn't.
The source material details a massive Russian interference effort. They actually describe it as a masterclass in hybrid electoral warfare.
Okay, let's break down how this actually worked on the ground, because it goes way beyond just standard propaganda. Investigative outlets found that Russia's military intelligence, the GRU, literally deployed a team of political technologists right into the Russian embassy in Budapest to quarterback this whole operation.
Yeah, and they executed this massive digital bait and switch.
How so?
Well, digital forensics experts identified dozens of massive Telegram channels. Now, for years, these channels had been building up huge local audiences just by pushing generic pro-Kremlin narratives about the war in Ukraine.
Right.
But then, suddenly and simultaneously, they completely repurposed their networks. They basically flipped a switch and started blasting out hyper-localized disinformation, specifically targeting Hungarian opposition candidates.
Wow. And they also escalated into psychological operations using the phone networks, right?
Yeah, the phone calls.
Ethnic Hungarians living in Transcarpathia, which is a region in western Ukraine with a large Hungarian minority, they suddenly started receiving coordinated, mass-threatening phone calls.
And the mechanics of those calls are fascinating. They used spoofed Ukrainian phone numbers, so it made it look like the threats were coming from local Ukrainian nationalists.
That is so incredibly cynical.
It was entirely designed to stoke historical ethnic tensions. The goal was to carify conservative Hungarian voters into believing that a pro-Western government in Budapest would just abandon ethnic Hungarians to a hostile Ukrainian state.
But they got caught.
They did. Ukraine's intelligence service later traced the digital origins of those calls right back to Russian territory.
So you have the digital stuff, the psychological stuff,
Yeah.
but then you have the physical plots, which is where it gets like spy thriller.
The game changer plot.
Right. According to a European intelligence document cited by the Washington Post, Russian Foreign Intelligence, the SVR, had this plot codenamed the Game Changer.
It's such a dramatic name.
Right. They were proposing a staged, totally fake assassination attempt on Viktor Orbán to generate a massive surge of public sympathy right before the vote.
Unbelievable.
And on top of that, Serbian police found 4 kilograms of fake explosives near a gas pipeline close to the Hungarian border, which Hungarian officials immediately blamed on Ukraine without any evidence.
But here's the thing.
Wait, actually, I have to push back here for a second.
Sure.
With all these different plots running at the exact same time, like fake assassinations, pipeline explosives, mass telegram bot pivots, spoofed ethnic phone calls, is it really possible for one foreign state to smoothly pull all these strings? Or does it just become a messy, transparent dogpile that voters can just see right through?
Well, that's exactly the vulnerability the source analysis highlights. It did become a dogpile.
Really?
Yeah, the multi-layered operation fundamentally failed because hybrid interference has hard limits.
Right.
When a foreign intelligence service is confronted with a highly mobilized electorate that is hyper-focused on tangible, daily issues.
The kitchen table issue.
Exactly. All the digital tricks in the world lose their power. I mean, a Telegram bot network cannot convince a voter that their real wages aren't falling or that their local hospital isn't severely understaffed.
So the grand conspiracy's actually backfired.
Precisely. All of these highly visible interference operations, combined with those devastating shared tow audio leaks, they ended up proving Magyar's central argument. It totally validated the opposition's narrative that the incumbent government had dangerously compromised the country's sovereignty just to hold on to power.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because Russia wasn't the only external power throwing its weight around. In a truly bizarre geopolitical twist, a major Western ally jumped into the fray just 5 days before the vote.
Yeah. On April 7th, 2026, United States Vice President J.D. Vance made an incredibly unusual and highly controversial visit directly to Budapest.
It's like your loud neighbor walking right into your living room to lecture your family on how to vote in your household meeting, while simultaneously screaming that the local bank is being way too intrusive in your finances.
It really was exactly like that.
Because Vice President Vance actually went to a campaign rally at the MCK Sport Park Arena and explicitly told the Hungarian crowd they needed to re-elect Viktor Orbán.
And the structural contradictions of that visit were just glaring.
Oh, completely.
During a speech, Vance accused the European Union of engaging in, quote, one of the worst examples of election interference through their use of economic influence.
Right.
Yet he was standing there as a sitting U.S. vice president, engaging in an unprecedented, explicit act of election interference on behalf of a foreign incumbent.
It's wild. And didn't he also mention Ukraine in that speech?
Heck, he did. He publicly blamed elements within Ukrainian intelligence for meddling in the Hungarian election, offering zero substantiated evidence.
It seems to highlight a massive tension in the Trump-Vance foreign policy framework. I mean, they champion national sovereignty as their absolute core value, but in the exact same breath, they showed a total willingness to overtly shape a foreign nation's internal democratic process. How did the Hungarian public actually react to this American drop-in?
It was a huge strategic miscalculation. At a purely logistical level, the intense security required for a visiting U.S. vice president caused massive traffic jams all across Budapest.
Oh, people hate that.
Exactly. It deeply irritated the local population just days before they voted. But politically, it played right into Peter Magyar's hands.
Because it proved his point again.
Exactly. It reinforced the idea that Orbán was no longer a strong, independent leader, but rather someone entirely dependent on foreign powers to stay afloat. Whether he was calling Moscow or Washington for a lifeline, it proved that you cannot just export American, Magyar-adjacent political strategies and expect them to resonate in a totally different cultural and institutional ecosystem.
So with Washington pushing from one side, Moscow pushing from the other, and the domestic economy basically in free fall, all of this pressure finally collided on the night of April 13th.
The big night.
Let's bring the timeline to election night itself. Despite all these geopolitical forces at play, how did the actual transition of power unfold on the ground?
The real-time reporting from the DW broadcast provides some incredible insight into the mood of the country that night. They had reporters stationed on both sides of the political divide.
Right, Frank Gall and Fanny Faxar.
Yes. So Ferenc Gall was reporting from Orbán's election watch party, while Fanny Faxar was in central Budapest with the opposition.
And Gall noted that Orbán's watch party was rapidly dispersing incredibly early in the evening, right? Like, the sheer scale of the 53% supermajority became obvious so quickly that the atmosphere wasn't even one of angry defiance. It was just a subdued resignation.
It was. But DW also captured the very real, legitimate fears of Orbán's base that night.
Yeah, we have to talk about that.
These voters were expressing deep, genuine anxiety about their financial futures. Many were terrified of losing their pro-natalist financial support.
And these are essentially government bonuses, right? Tax breaks and housing subsidies you receive simply for having children.
Exactly. It was a core pillar of Orbán's demographic policy. And there was also this deeply internalized fear that a new government would immediately strip away these benefits and drag Hungary directly into the Ukraine war.
Because those narratives were the absolute bedrock of the incumbent's campaign.
Right, and those anxieties don't just vanish because the polls close.
Meanwhile, though, Fanny Faxar is out in central Budapest, surrounded by this jubilant youth movement. I mean, for many voters under 35, this was literally the first time in their adult lives they had ever witnessed a democratic transition of power.
That's a profound moment.
It is. After 16 years of the ruling party continually rewriting the electoral maps and the Constitution, many people secretly expected that a genuine alternation of power might just be impossible.
Which brings us to a really crucial moment that stabilized the entire country that night. Viktor Orbán issued a prompt public concession.
Right, he didn't drag it out.
He didn't. He even made a direct congratulatory call to Magyar. And by conceding so quickly and decisively, Orbán effectively validated the integrity of the election. He prevented any kind of stolen election narrative from taking root in what was a highly volatile moment.
But securing that victory in the first place required an insane amount of groundwork. We talked about the state's grip on the media earlier. So Magyar bypassed the heavily politicized national broadcasting networks by relying on just grueling face-to-face retail politics.
He was everywhere.
The man was doing 5 to 7 campaign stops a day, physically going into the rural strongholds that the ruling party traditionally owned. That geographic shift, convincing rural voters in person rather than through a screen, that is what ultimately delivered the supermajority.
But as we know, winning the election and governing the state are two very different things.
Yeah. So what does this all actually mean? Even with 138 seats and a constitutional supermajority, how does Magyar steer the ship? It's like taking over as the pilot of a plane in a nosedive, but discovering the previous pilot superglued the landing gear controls shut before handing you the steering yoke.
That analogy is spot on, and Magyar has openly adopted the concept of leading a kamikaze government.
A kamikaze government.
Yeah, because the inheritance is structurally brutal. He is walking into a situation with a 5.2% budget deficit. The country is still 90% reliant on Russian oil, which you cannot just fix overnight.
Right, because it relies on physical, cross-border pipeline infrastructure that takes years to reroute.
Exactly, and the institutional lock-in is arguably the hardest part. Over 16 years, the previous government embedded loyalists into the deepest nodes of the state.
Like who?
Like the chief prosecutor, the judges on the Constitutional Court, the head of the State Audit Office. These positions are all staffed by Orbán appointees who were given fixed 9-year terms.
Wow, so they don't leave just because the prime minister changed.
No, they don't. So Magyar has to execute this incredibly delicate fiscal high-wire act. To satisfy the European Commission and unlock that massive 22.5 billion euros in frozen funds, he has to enact painful, highly technical fiscal reforms.
But wait, if he does that, what about the voters he just won over?
That's the trap. At the exact same time, he has to maintain the social safety net, like those family tax reliefs we talked about, that the newly flipped rural voters are terrified of losing.
Because if he cuts social spending to balance the budget, he risks an immediate massive political backlash from the very people who just took a huge chance on him.
Precisely. It is a monumental governing challenge.
Okay, let's zoom out to close this deep dive. Because the global ripple effect of this single Central European election is just massive.
The geopolitical dividend is immediate. Magyar's victory removes the primary internal roadblock within the European Union. Prior to this, Budapest had been actively vetoing a 90 billion euro EU credit line intended for Ukraine.
90 billion.
Yes. And with the new government committed to European institutional norms, that credit line is almost certainly unblocked. Furthermore, Moscow has lost its most reliable, high-level interlocutor operating inside Western institutions. The entire dynamic of European consensus shifts overnight.
So for you listening, if you've ever watched a deeply entrenched political regime and thought they were completely invincible, this deep dive proves that democratic resilience can survive even the most systematically rigged institutional ecosystems.
Absolutely.
When voters are mobilized and when an opposition focuses relentlessly on tangible, everyday kitchen table issues, it can overwhelm the deepest patronage networks and the most sophisticated foreign hybrid warfare.
It's a really stark reminder that structural advantages and digital disinformation, they only go so far when the economic reality on the ground actively contradicts the official narrative being broadcast on state TV.
Which brings us right back to that fortress we talked about at the beginning.
Right.
We so often look at entrenched, illiberal political systems, and we think of them as permanent, impenetrable fortresses. But consider this. What if the very tools used to consolidate that power, like vast patronage networks that rely entirely on external funding, are actually their biggest structural vulnerabilities once the money stops flowing? If the fortress requires a continuous, massive influx of cash just to pay off the guards, how strong are the walls, really?
Something to think about next time a political system looks invincible.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the walls around you.